قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks, a continuation of my discussion on holistic development, on healing and eating. And with me I have Nazneen Khan, who is a dietitian. And Nazneen is in private practice now, having worked for very many years in the corporate sector. One of her biggest achievements has been with Nestle and infant feeding. She's also on 2 committees regarding feeding and nutrition. And I thought that it would be a very important discussion to talk about infant feeding and to talk specifically about children, how we feed them, what we feed them, the myths, the fallacies, and of course the big taboos. So with that, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum Nazneen and welcome back.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thanks for having me again.
So the first discussion we had very many weeks ago, perhaps a few months ago, was about adult feeding and nutrition. But now I think very importantly we need to talk about children, to talk about infants. You see so many mothers doing strange things, telling you strange things, and we've often found that everybody's a doctor, everybody's a nutrition, everybody is a health expert. So there are many things that need to be unpacked. Perhaps we need to get rid of particular misunderstandings. There are very many myths, and try and follow the correct approach to infant feeding. Let's start with perhaps some of the myths and the misunderstandings, the things that people do wrong and why you say they're wrong and what would be the correct way.
I think fundamentally the first thing that I'd like to talk about is, and what I find in my practice that people or moms come to me for, is they're not sure when to start feeding solids and what should they start feeding their little ones. So essentially we talk about exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. And then we talk about introducing solid foods. However, there are a few exceptions to the rule, of course, and what we look at is if there are risks for allergies, we know that there's a window period in which you should start introducing solid foods, and that's between 17 weeks and 24 weeks.
Sure, that's early.
It's early, but what's interesting and where I was leading to is that there are moms that are starting to feed solid foods earlier than 17 weeks.
So 17 weeks would be just over 4 months, right?
Just over 4 months. It's basically you celebrate the 4-month birthday and the next couple of days you start feeding the solid foods. And the challenge for me here is that when you start too early, you're actually predisposing the child to so many issues. One could be inducing allergies. The other one is that the child is not ready to be able to swallow. Remember that the first couple of months is a liquid diet, and the gag reflex is quite strong only after you've started introducing solids at 6 months. Before then, you find that the child is actually going to swallow, is going to choke. So you want to keep that window period open. But there are a couple of other indicators that makes a child ready for solid foods. One is that they can actually sit up without lolling their heads back.
So if they do that by 4 months, you can actually start?
You can actually start, but also do it under medical supervision. And the second thing is that they should be able to push themselves up on their forearms. Because then at least they have good head and neck control. The swallowing reflex is much stronger than the gag reflex. And if they end up choking, it's just easier for them to be able to position the head so that the food actually goes through. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, is not to start solid feeding before 17 weeks.
Okay, but you spoke of window period for allergies. So how do you know that your child is allergy prone or that there is an issue?
Usually there's a family history of allergies. Then you would categorize the child at risk for allergies. What I do want to emphasize though is usually children born to parents that have, or mums that have actually avoided certain food groups in their diet, not because of the health reasons or because of their allergies, but because the neighbor's sister said something in passing, oh, you shouldn't eat eggs in your pregnancy, or you shouldn't eat peanut butter in your pregnancy. Unless the mom has a pronounced medically diagnosed allergic reaction to a certain food group or food, she should be eating everything. Yes, of course, there are certain dangers. In moderation. Well, I don't know about that in pregnancy. I tend to think that women eat everything except crushed glass in pregnancies. But, obviously things like sushi or raw fish we definitely stay away from as a pregnant mom. But you know, when you are pregnant, the more varied diet you're exposed to, the better the exposure to the fetus. And that actually starts what we call programming the fetus to ward off allergies later on in life.
So by you consuming, extensive diet, in other words, exposing yourself to different foods, you're already exposing the fetus to different foods. And that
100%, yes.
creates a form of immunity.
That's a form of immunity. That's the programming part. So actually, when you start swinging the different types of allergic pathways, you actually start developing the immune system to fight off any kind of allergies that might present.
So, what is strange for me as a mother is like illnesses in children, allergies especially in children to nuts and to weird things that we never saw 20, 25, 30 years ago. We're now seeing it. It's almost, every second, third child. I have two mothers, particularly in mine, who said that from the time their children were born, they had such bad allergies that they were on antibiotics for every second, third month. Where has this come from?
I have to say that there's a whole host of reasons, but one of the reasons that I've really noticed is this diets of moms who do exclusions, or they go on specific fad diets that make them, exclude total food groups, like, you exclude dairy completely, for example. I'm not a fan of exclusions at all. I believe that when you start eating a more varied diet and a diet that includes all your food groups, you basically end up making sure that your children are exposed to all of this, and as such you start building up the resistance. So yes, just to answer your question directly, I think it's the environment that we're living in today. It's the type of lifestyles that we live, and it's also the amount of convenience that we tap into. I think not only just about being able to have a blender at hand, but I also think it's about the type of convenience that would have us pass through a drive-through instead of making something special at home.
So when you start feeding your infant, you're starting with the basic, I don't want to take brand names here, but you start with those basic cereals, etc. Would you recommend that you start that way, or would you say make your own food?
There's so many different mindsets about this, and I thought maybe it's a good idea to just clarify. So there's a school of thought that will say stay away from rice cereal completely, and there's a whole host of publications about why you should stay away from rice cereal. And then you get a whole mindset that talks about introducing the vegetables first, and then there's the mindset that says, you know what, you can start with the protein first. So to dispel those myths,
must be difficult navigating as a young mother.
So to dispel those myths, and you're right, there's the group of moms that actually have access to information, and my worry is those that don't have the access to information. But coming back to this is, when you start introducing your child to solid foods, the first couple of weeks it's not meant to replace the milk. It's not the single source of nutrition or the main source of nutrition. It's actually to teach that swallowing reflex to something different than just an all liquid diet. That's the first thing. Second thing is, what we need to start considering is at a certain stage in a child's life, and that's around 4 to 6 months, the iron stores of a child start becoming depleted. So you have to supplement the iron without obviously giving an iron supplement, right? And you need to start considering what the choices are for that. Now, while certain vegetables are known to have high iron, you'd probably have to puree about 2 kilos of spinach. I mean, have you boiled spinach, a bag of spinach, and it's come out to exactly 4 leaves after? But you probably have to get through all of those spinach leaves to be able to give a certain amount of iron. So the best thing that you could do is to look for an iron fortified offering. And you do get iron fortified cereals today, and that would be my first go-to.
So this is not synthetic, it's like genuine stuff.
No, it's genuine stuff. It's rice cereal. A lot of the cereals today have a very much reduced sugar content. So personally, I've used it in my child. I would say that once your baby is used to a thicker consistency and they're eating up to 2 spoonfuls of cereal, you can then start introducing some of the vegetables, but not start with the vegetables. Think about it, Quraysha. When I put a patient on a diet, I increase the vegetables in their diet because it's low in nutrients in terms of kilojoules. Okay, obviously it's got the high vitamins, etc., which I'm not taking away from it, but it's low in kilojoules. And now if I'm replacing a feed, for example, whether it's breast milk or formula, etc., and I'm replacing it with a low calorie food, I'm actually kind of cheating my child of the nutrient density.
And will they then also get more hungry more often?
Ideally they would, because again, I mean, vegetables, fruit, not the most satisfying, especially if you're taking away the peels and the pits. There's not much of fiber left in there. I'm not saying don't introduce it. I'm saying don't introduce it solely as the first
So you supplement
food.
it with the cereal?
Absolutely. So you start with a rice cereal or a maize cereal. And why do I say rice and maize? Because they're the least allergenic. Rice and maize is the least allergenic of the grains. And then when you do start introducing vegetables and fruit, you'll start with the orange vegetables, the green vegetables like your carrots, your pumpkin, your butternut. I would suggest not to start with fruit first. Reason being is as soon as you introduce fruit, it's sweeter. Baby's not going to want those carrots, I can tell you that. I mean, an apple versus a carrot, you just get the sweetness.
Or apple versus spinach.
Or even the apple versus spinach. So obviously the spinach will come a bit later in the introduction of solids journey. But yeah, you want to start with a cereal, a good iron fortified cereal, then the vegetables, and then a little bit later on you can introduce the combination or the fruit.
But throughout all of this, you still maintain that you must keep up the dairy, the milk, the formula, or if you're breastfeeding?
Breast milk, definitely you keep up. Formula milk, if you are, absolutely. Up to about the age of a year, a child needs just over a liter of milk in a day.
In a day?
In a day.
Wow, that's a
liter
lot.
Of milk in a day. Actually, if you break it up, it's 6 feeds in a day. So you're breaking up that 1,000 mils into 6 feeds. It's quite doable. Once they hit a year old, we taper that down to about 600 mils, even 500 mils.
Okay, so we have to go to a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about feeding that's being induced in order to make the baby sleep. Okay, so we'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks with my very special guest Nazneen Khan, who is a dietitian in private practice, and we're talking about infants, infant feeding, infant nutrition. And before we went on to the break, Nazneen unpacked how it is that we should introduce solid food into our children's lives, into their diet, and at what age and how to look out for the necessary time period as to when you should be introducing certain solids. But now I want to talk about something that's very close to my heart, and Nazneen, I want to raise this with you. I have seen very many parents obsess about, they like, preoccupied with this idea that the child should sleep through the night. Now, I don't ever remember having a full night's sleep when I had my children up to, of course, a certain age, And we coped. We just dealt with it and we went on. We felt it was part of the natural routine. But today there is this obsession, and even if you go to the pediatricians, you go to doctors, they tell you no, the child should be sleeping through the night, etc. And it creates, I think, in a way, an anxiety and a stress in the parents. Why isn't my child sleeping through the night? And then of course there's the alternate response is, your child is hungry, so feed your child, give them solids before they sleep. And yet we as adults know that we should eat less before we go and sleep and try and eat a good amount of time before we sleep, because it's unhealthy to sleep on a full stomach. So how do you address this issue, and what is it that parents do?
It's such a challenge. You're absolutely right. I think it's this tension created around the fact that, a woman has to have a full 7 hours sleep. And gosh, I don't know when last I've actually slept. I think before my pregnancy.
That's a long time.
It's a long time ago. But having said that, the one thing that grandparents especially, and I've been subject to that, not so much a grandparent, but definitely in that generation, will say to you is, you need to fill the bottle with cereal. Make it a runny cereal. Cut the teeth a little bit bigger of the bottle and feed this child because this child needs to sleep. Please, Lord, no. Don't do this. Very importantly, a child's sleeping patterns. Let me say this. As an adult,
We don't have sleeping.
we don't sleep right through the night. You do know that we wake up several times in the night. The difference is that children that do wake up and want some kind of attention in the middle of the night aren't able to soothe themselves to sleep. When we wake up in the middle of the night, when we turn over, etc., we've learned how to soothe ourselves to sleep. And that's the challenge. So it's more a developmental issue than it is a feeding issue.
So when the baby gets up, the baby's not really hungry, not necessarily.
Not always. I mean, there are certain cases where this baby is hungry. I mean, if you fed the baby at 4 o'clock in the evening and this child slept, this child's going to get up at 11 o'clock for another feed. But, obviously it's about routine. It's about how to get this child to self-soothe. I often find that moms that are breastfeeding have the least amount of sleep, although you'll say that, you'll just whip it out and feed the little baby. But what tends to happen a little bit later on in the child's life is that they associate the breast with sleeping.
And with comfort also.
For comfort. So often I tell my patients what to do in this case is when the child does wake up, I don't know if children are sleeping in different rooms, etc., but by the age of 1.5, 2, they're often sleeping in separate rooms. I often say that if the child wakes up in the middle of the night, send the dad. I know it's a challenge because often the men will say, I have to go to work tomorrow morning. But I think in today's lifestyle, women are also going to work the next morning.
And parenting is a two-way street.
Absolutely, absolutely. So often I would say, you take yourself as the woman out of the equation because this child is then associating the fact that mom's here, I'm going to get some milk, and then that's the feeding. And we tend to overfeed then. It's usually not necessary. I also say to my parents that what they can do in the middle of the night if the child does wake up and if the child is on formula, to dilute that formula a little bit. So
You're saying dilute and there's others who say make it thicker.
I'll say why dilute, because in the middle of the night, if that child's not getting the full quantity, he knows what the formula is tasting like. He knows what the breast milk is tasting like. If daddy's coming and there's no breast there, he's not going to have the milk. And if mom's going to be diluting the formula, he's not going to associate this rich, thick, lovely sensation to sleep and make me sleep. Give the last feed, a proper, full constituted last feed before bedtime or when the child's going to sleep. Brush teeth, of course, after that. And then get the baby to lull off, yes. And then try not to do the dream sleeps. The dream sleeps are actually quite detrimental because you're overfeeding. The child should have its
What is the dream sleep? Now I'm lost there.
The dream feed. The dream feed is literally feeding the child in its sleep. So, often...
Really?
Yes. So often moms tend to think, my child's gone without sleeping, without eating for such a long time. I'm going to prepare a feed or I'm going to, give him some breast milk. Not necessary. The child will wake up when he needs to eat or he'll wake up when he's uncomfortable, needs a nappy change, etc. But the cutting of the teeth and filling the milk bottle with a runny cereal is an absolute no-no. You're inducing the tendency for obesity.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, because it's really not necessary. Cereal's meant to be eaten in a bowl, eaten with a spoon, at the table. Create good routine, good eating habits, create a relationship with food. We often find that, and I know, it's a bugbear of mine, is when a child's crying, the child must be hungry.
Hungry, yes.
Push food in the mouth. This is a direct, it's directly correlated to comfort eating in adulthood. Something's wrong, I feel depressed, I feel like I need a cry. Where's the ice cream? Where's the chocolate? Where's something? I'm going to go and treat myself to a big round of pizza. I'm not saying that pizza is wrong or ice cream is wrong, but when it's meant to soothe you and comfort you, there's an issue with the relationship with yourself and food.
So when the child is crying, and without a doubt, in most instances, mother will say they're probably hungry. What would you then recommend?
Again, depending on the age of the child, right? I mean, obviously, if it's a little baby and it's time for feeding, you have to give the feed. I often would say distraction. Often children cry because they want attention. They want a sensory stimulus of theirs fulfilled. And whether it is your attention, or whether it's to go outside and jump on the jungle gym, or whether it is to actually express their creativity through painting or artwork or scribbling or whatever it is, I think it's very important. In my practice, there's a lot of focus on sensory development. And I'll give you an example. Not so long ago, there was a child on the other side of the spectrum who refused to eat. And we created sensory bins. And what sensory bins are really household goodies, food items that are not obviously dangerous and you won't be able to get choked on. You create little bins and get these kids to focus and play on this. It changes their perspective and relationship to what, absolutely, textures, smells, the look of things, how to actually prepare them to help mommy in the kitchen, obviously age appropriately. It really shifts the trajectory. But when a child is crying and looking for attention, as a mom, you would know what a child is looking for. It's
instinct.
You would know also. I think, you know, when my little one was growing up, or when he was a baba, I mean, he's still a little baby, but when he was a baba, I could figure out the distressed crying
From them.
and the crying for attention.
There's something I want to ask you also. I found in very many mothers, and that is that the child has to finish the food. Now, I mean, I've seen with children, when you feed them, they'll eat, and at a certain point, they'll just refuse to eat more. But then there's that, you know, that absolute obsession. The child must finish the food. How do you respond to that?
I think you have to take the lead from the child. When the child has been eating and then purses its lips or turns his face or mouth, that's a sign to say, Mom, I've had enough. Children inherently have they have an innate need to satisfy their hunger when they're hungry.
And children will never starve,
They
right?
will never starve.
Okay.
They will never starve.
My
They're
mother
gonna
always
come
used to
to
tell
you.
me that,
They'll
don't
come to you, "Mummy, I'm
obsess.
hungry."
Children will never starve.
What I would rather suggest is keep very attractive snacks and food available. Make them understand that there's dinner time, there's snack time. Make them understand that, you know, this is when you should be eating an apple, this is when you should be eating your rice, etc. And create dinner time. Don't you eat before them and then expect them to sit before you or after you. Again, age appropriately. I mean, if the child is 7 months old, you're not going to wait, you're not going to have dinner at 4 o'clock. But once they're starting to eat at the main table, make sure that you eat together as a family. Because then they start respecting food, they start respecting mealtime, and they start understanding that they should be eating specific foods at specific
We're
times.
almost at the end. What would you like to specifically bring home in terms of, you know, infant nutrition?
There's so much I could actually still talk about, but the one message that I really want to communicate is don't let your preferences as a mom influence your child's eating habits. We like salt, we like sugar, we like spice. I'm not saying don't add that at any stage, but when a child is starting solid foods, there is no need for sugar, there is no need for salt, there is no need for spice. Yes, we do prepare foods later on in life. I mean, those kids will start eating home foods, but the salt and sugar especially, try and stay away from until the child's eating from the home pot.
Wow, okay, so that's at what age? About 2 years?
I would say about a year and a half. So when you start dishing out the same food and you're not preparing a separate meal, that's when obviously I would still say go easy on the salt. But
the sugar.
we teach the children sweet and salty. They don't understand it before.
Okay, and that's very important.
Very important, because those are those are the types of ingredients that will either push you towards hypertensive, diabetes.
One last quick comment about probiotics or prebiotics for infants.
Absolutely a fan. Absolutely a fan of probiotics for infants. Prebiotics you would find in some of the cereals, some of the formulas if you're formula feeding. Breast milk inherently has what we call the bifidogenic effect. So it generates probiotics in the breast milk. And then obviously to give, if you're formula feeding, to give something with probiotics is excellent. But also you get additional probiotics that you could add to food. Just also give it in a teaspoon.
So usually it's like a drop.
It's a drop
for children, right?
It's a drop.
Okay, Nazneen, thank you very much for sharing this very valuable information, and hopefully we can learn to shed the myths and the housewife tales and focus on doing something that is really important, necessary and healthy for our children. After all, eating and the attitude to food plays or comes a long way in developing healthy adults.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
ودين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في